Hey everyone, happy Monday. You are joining us for our Marketing Monday, which happens every Monday through the Watertown Oswego SBDC office at noontime. And here we are. Thanks for being with us. And we just always want to mention again that this is the Watertown Oswego SBDC bringing this programming to you. And the other amazing thing that the SBDC does in the Jefferson, Lewis, Oswego counties is to offer free small business advising to any individual or small business under 500 or under employees. So I think a lot of people don't realize that existing businesses can be assisted by the SBDC too. So always like to mention that. And I think that's it. We do have some really cool stuff coming up in the May-June timeline. We're going to be focusing on a food venture course that we have some people coming in for that. So I just want to make sure everybody who might be interested in that kind of stuff keeps an eye on our Facebook or joins our email list if you're not already there. So with that, all of that said, I'll hand it over to Nicole, our marketing guru.
I'm not the marketing guru today. I'm just here going to be asking questions with you, Erica, because we have a guest today. Zac
Yeah,
Miller.
We do. Yeah.
So I'll bring Zac on and I'll
excited.
let him introduce himself. Hey, Zac.
Hey, Nicole. Hey, Erica.
I'm going
How are
to change
you?
our
Hey,
words.
Zac.
I feel like this is a little better.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me today.
Oh, we're so happy that you're here with us. We know you're going to be offering some amazing information about podcasting, especially today, but maybe a few other snippets
Sure.
for people to think about too. So, yeah.
Happy to be here. And thank you to Nicole, to the SBDC for having me. Should I just start? Should I just say a little bit about myself?
That'd be great.
Okay. I love that.
Yeah.
So I am a professional podcast producer. I'm also a video professor at Clarkson University. I adjunct over there, teach video production classes. My background is really in the media industry. I've been making TV, video, and now podcasts since 2005. So I currently produce a show called LOL with Kim Gravel. I should say LOL with Kim Gravel. It's in the top 2% of podcasts globally. We're on the Apple podcasting charts and comedy interview as a comedy interview show. We've been on the charts in I think over 12 countries now. So that's one of the cool things about podcasting is that there is a global reach. And that's like one of the exciting things and one of the potential opportunities for business owners. As well as sort of like a hyper local reach. And it really depends on your show and what you're doing. And we can talk more about that. But I've been a professional in the media industry for, like I said, over, now 17, 18 years. I worked on and was the production manager on big shows like CBS's Big Brother, Catfish, which was a huge hit on MTV. I've done videos for like Harvard Medical School, a whole lot of educational work that I did with WGBH in Boston. And since I started my company in 2017, I produced content and videos for Kettle One Vodka, Alcoa here in Messina, Westfield Malls, which is a huge mall chain in Los Angeles, and like a whole lot of other local and national clients. I'm also a member of the Producers Guild of America. So that's me in a nutshell.
We really have a big deal on our hands today. So.
I have a big deal. I don't feel that way. But let's talk about podcasts because that's what I love. And I honestly started as a podcast listener, and just realized that I was consuming a huge amount of audio every day. And that's really when I decided to transition from video production into audio. And that was a decision I made a couple of years ago. And since then it's really taken off and the entire industry's taken off. And if we can look at, I pulled out some industry, reports that, I'll show you guys websites for that and we can include links to these reports, but basically podcasting is growing and it's growing really fast. And you can see that listening now is percent of total population that is listening to podcasts is at 62%, 177 million people. And people that listen to podcasts tend to listen to more than one podcast, and that's this next chart here. The average listener averages 8 podcasts, which is really exciting, and that number keeps growing. And you see, like, after you get, more than 50% of people are in the 4+ category of listening to podcasts every week. So there's a lot of room to grow in the industry. There's more listeners and there's more shows than ever, but there's also more opportunity than ever. And there are some reports that I was actually just looking at before I got on, that are talking about the podcast space, I think exceeding $3 billion in advertising in the next couple of years. So the numbers are getting really big, which is exciting. Because there are a lot of opportunities for both small businesses and big businesses in the space. And I'd love, Erica and Nicole, if you have questions, jump in. But
I mean, do you have a feeling? I don't know if you're covering this already, so I'm sorry if I'm asking you a question that's way premature here. But I'm just wondering, do you have a feeling, or have you seen stats on why they're so big or getting more and more popular? I mean, some of that seems a little counterintuitive, but then again, maybe we're all sick of our, what we're doing today.
I mean, I think that there's some of that to it. I think that you really actually teed me up perfectly for what I want to talk to you about, which is why podcasts are so powerful. And I think that podcasts are just another, it's just another way, obviously, to have engaging content that people are listening to. And I think that, when you look at podcasting against something like music, still people are listening to like way more music than they are podcasts. But I think people are discovering that they really like listening to podcasts when they're doing things like, I listen to podcasts when I wash the dishes. I listen to podcasts when I'm like doing other cleaning, when I'm driving, when I'm, doing, when I'm working out, things like that. So a lot of it is just having something to like a go-to when you're doing, going about your day to day. And I think that's the same as like, instead of turning on the radio, people want more control. We're starting to feel like we are able to curate sort of what we listen to a little bit more. So rather than just turn on the radio, it's like, oh, my favorite podcast is here. And oh, by the way, they have a back catalog of 140 episodes and I'm going to work my way back through them. Right.
Yeah,
so
that makes a ton of sense. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So for certain content too, I see, for my podcast, particularly, we get more than 40%, closer probably to about 45% of our listens in a given week in our back catalog, not our newest episode. Our newest episode accounts for somewhere between 50 and 60% of our listens, which means people are digging back and listening to stuff that they want to, and that they're finding episodes they want. They're finding guests on the show that they want. And my show is, we have a lighthearted sort of like comedy podcast, really geared toward women, actually. Kim Gravel is a host on QVC. She has her own brand. She had her own reality TV show that I worked on 10 years ago. So the content that we're doing is evergreen. And that's actually another one of the really powerful things about podcasting is once the podcast is out there, it's out there. And people might find it a year later, 2 years later, and it will still have the impact that it had on day one. Right. So it's a long game. But I think really the power of podcasting is that podcasters create an intimate bond. You literally are like putting the earbuds inside your head, right? When you listen to a podcast, really, as I am. And there's actually been some research on that, which is really interesting and like a tangent, I guess. But when you actually put the earbuds in your head, you do form a closer connection than rather than listening like just on a speaker or something. And there's more and more coming out about that, but that's really interesting. But podcasts can also get extremely niche, right? You can do a podcast like about Watertown, for instance, right? And that could be really powerful. And you don't need to have, 100,000 listeners for that podcast to be extremely powerful. In fact, there's probably little chance that a podcast specifically to like Watertown would have that many listeners, but with the right 200 people, it could be extremely influential in the community, right? And it's really helpful to think of a podcaster really as like an influencer. if you want to think of it in sort of more, I'm going to say traditional marketing terms, but is influencer marketing even traditional marketing? I don't know. Maybe Nicole knows that.
Someone called me an influencer the other day, and I didn't know whether to be like flattered or insulted. I don't know. It's I think this idea is if you put ideas out there and people listen to them, I guess you're an influencer, right?
Let's call it a thought. You're a thought leader. Let's do that.
Thanks. I
Yeah,
like that better.
it's one of those things where it's always been around, but I think, the idea of it, the concept is new, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have a very brief kind of question because I feel like this was true, 7 or 8 years ago. But, at one point, we could point to podcast listeners as being higher income, being of a certain demographic. And as listenership goes up, I'm not sure if that continues to be true or not, or if it's just more people are listening to podcasts, so more different kinds of people are listening to podcasts. Do you have?
I think it depends on the show. I mean, when I look at the demographics, it pretty much matches the demographics of the U.S. at this point now. I think it's a big enough chunk of the pie. Like it's a pretty even split in terms of men and women listening. It's a pretty even split in terms of like racial demographic breakdowns, things like that. I do think you are right. It tended to be younger and more affluent folks who were listening to podcasts, and I think that is part of the reason is that the first major player in the space was NPR, and I think that some of that listenership probably was sort of followed those demographics. But yeah, I think it's everyone now. I think that's really the headline in the last few years. Yeah.
We do have a question from a listener, a watcher.
Yes. Okay.
Whatever we're calling this. Are podcasters competing with the same audience as audio folks on Clubhouse? I think this is Renee here.
That's a good
Renee's
question,
of a Clubhouse person. I think Renee has written this. I don't know if it is Renee, but I think so.
Okay. Maybe Renee. I see Clubhouse, as Clubhouse is really interesting because Clubhouse sort of had its like big moment, maybe what was like a year ago. And it's definitely still thriving. There's a lot of really interesting stuff going on there. I don't see it necessarily being the same, I don't see it as being a direct competition. And I think part of that is just because like the pie is just getting bigger, right? Like more people are listening, more people are engaging. As there is more content being put out there, it is attracting new people who are interested in that content. And I think that there obviously is, there is only so many hours in the day, right? And there's only so many ears and so many eyeballs, and we're all competing for attention at some level. But I do think that, again, because podcasting can be so evergreen, you can't get your message out there and it stays out there, whereas Clubhouse is more of like in that moment. It's like saying, is putting out a CD that's competing with like the live artist coming to town and doing a concert. It's just sort of apples to oranges a little bit. But I do think that like the competition is high, and that's one of the things that is on the negative side of the podcast growth, which is like I'm not competing necessarily. I'm not thinking about competing with Clubhouse, but I am thinking about competing with like Disney, right? Or with Wondery and with these other big production companies that are coming into the mix and bringing A-list celebrities and bringing millions of dollars of marketing might and, sucking up all the air in the field, which is, difficult, but also something that if you're smart about it and set your goals correctly, then you can really kind of overcome and get a lot of value out of podcasting. Which sort of brings me to the idea of like, why would someone create your own podcast, right? And I think to me, creating a podcast is really, if you're creating your own podcast and your own show, you're really doing it because you want to build trust and create that relationship with an audience, right? You have something to say, you have some value to bring. And I think that is really the key thing to think about, which is like, what is the value? Why do the people that I want to have listen to the show, why are they going to actually listen? Right. So, I know Nicole, like you do a lot of things like this. You do live events, you do your own events, you help other clients. It's always about creating value, right? And I think that no matter the size of your show, like you don't have to have a show with thousands and thousands of downloads and in order to be successful. It really depends on what you're gauging success as, right? So I think a lot of podcasters, especially when they're starting out, you can think about like, hey, I'm in whatever field, right? I'm in you know, the again, let's say like let's keep it like local, right? If you're thinking about I'm a restaurant in you know, Watertown, right? Who are like the 10 most influential people just in your area that you could talk to and network with, right? And if you like just kind of cold email someone and say like, hey, I'd love to meet for coffee, chances are they're not going to get back to you. But if you say, hey, I want you to be on this podcast, we're going to talk about this and that, there's a much better chance they'll get back to you. It can start a network opportunity for you in your field, which is like a really interesting thing. And then that can grow into who knows what, right? So you can create and grow your own influence, become a thought leader, all those kind of things without having like that huge audience, which it will take time to build, right? Podcasting is not a 0 to 60 thing. It takes a long time to build that audience.
Well,
But
and yeah, and what I just want to throw this in there just because, you know, if you're thinking about if you're a local business, I think of like a local service business. Like if I'm a spa, like I haven't figured out how to export facials yet, right? I got to get someone in a certain area. And you might think, well, podcasts, it's just the big ones, you know, it's just these big national shows. And the reality is, if you think about a place, right, you have the people who live there, and I have like a little bit of a hyper local blog, and what I notice is the people who interact with it are people who are originally from there, people who have family that lives there, their grandparent or whatever lives there, you know, people coming there on vacation. So it's not just because you have a local business. Yes, your locals are going to keep you going, but there's also these other kinds of people who are interested in content about your location who don't necessarily live there. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well.
Speaking of providing and giving connection, giving connection to people, and them looking for it this way, that's kind of proof in the pudding there.
Exactly. And I mean, and if you can create that connection even quickly, right? Even if you have a little 10-minute show, and that's where actually guesting on other people's podcasts can be extremely powerful. And I've found a lot of people I've now made connections with and work with professionally because, for instance, they might have on their website a link to a podcast episode, or they might have, I saw someone who in their bio on like on Instagram or something in their Linktree or whatever that was like, this is like this podcast I was on, and it was like a 40-minute listen, but I really got to know that person because in that longer form interview where you're really able to like get in the weeds and talk about the thing, it's like, oh, this person clearly gets it, they know what they're doing, they know what they're talking about. I've now like gotten past that like trust barrier very quickly. And now I'm moving on to, oh, I'm in the area. Like I'm going to get that massage, or I'm going to check out that restaurant, or I'm going to like hire that freelancer, or whatever the case may be, because I saw them on that podcast. And it doesn't even have to be your own podcast, right? It can be guesting on another podcast, and it can be advertising on another podcast, which we'll talk about in a second. But businesses that typically do well with a podcast, I just want to mention sort of my list here, which is first is like services, right? Where you need to build that trust in order to create that longer relationship. So if you're someone that's doing like consulting, if you're someone that's doing, other types of services like marketing or advertising or, other things like that, then a podcast could be a really powerful way to start that relationship and build that trust and have people find you. Creative works, like if you write books, or if you're going to publish your own book, that obviously you already are putting ideas out there that can really translate well into a podcast. Again, you can use it as a way to market that book or that other product. High value products. So if you're selling something that costs a lot, right, you don't necessarily need to get that many sales from your podcast in order for it to be worth it. So if you're selling something obviously that's, $10 a pop, you need a lot of sales in order for that podcast episode to be worth it. Maybe don't, make your own podcast. Maybe that's an opportunity for you to, leverage podcasts in a different way, guest on podcasts or advertise on podcasts. But if you have something that's really expensive, then again, you need to build that trust before someone's going to buy from you. And that's where podcasts can be really powerful. Selling an online course, a lot of podcasters are doing online courses, things like that, or stuff that's hyper local. So if you do that, you can leverage events and in-person things. And that can be a really, really great way to monetize and leverage a podcast and create opportunities for your business. But if you're not planning on starting your own show, you can think about, how do I want to partner with an existing podcast? You can partner just by being on shows and guesting on shows, and you can also partner by advertising on shows. And let me here, I'll share my screen for a second here. If you could add that in, Nicole, I think.
Oh yeah, sure. Thanks
Awesome.
for reminding me.
Yeah. So this is actually like a little bio that was put together by a guest we had on our show, Dr. Tim Elmore, who wrote a book called The 8 Paradoxes of Great Leadership. And I really like that he put this together for shows. If you're thinking about being on a podcast, putting something together, just like a basic bio, potential topics you can talk about, suggested interview questions, press assets, things like that. There's a link here that has his headshot, which is here. Makes it really, really easy for someone to understand, oh, this is the value that person is bringing to my podcast. I understand why I might want them on the show. And you could do this in many different ways. You could make a little PDF deck, and it's not something you necessarily have to do, but podcasters get a ton of spam messages, even if you're a small show. Like I get dozens of emails every week of people that want to be on the show, or companies that are repping people that want to be on podcasts. And it's really clear that they aren't reaching out to me specifically, but they're just reaching out to like 100 people that day. So the more clear you can make it that, hey, you're reaching out to a podcast because you like the show, or you really do have a connection. Like if you are, you sell fishing supplies and there's a fishing podcast and you actually listen to it, or you Googled it and then you listened to an episode or two and realized it would be a really great fit. Make that clear when you're reaching out. And that's how you can actually cut through all that noise and get a response. Because I got news for you. Like podcasters want guests. They want people on the show. They want sponsors, but they just are inundated with just junk like all of us are. The other thing I wanted to mention is there are really easy platforms now for advertising on podcasts. This is one of them. It's called AudioGo. This actually is how you would advertise on SiriusXM. Let's see if I can. It's iHeartRadio, Pandora, SiriusXM, and it's a do-it-yourself, just like like advertising on any other platform. I think the minimum is like $250. And you can advertise on really specific podcasts, and you can also target localities, target certain types of people. Same thing. Spotify has an advertising platform where you can advertise on podcasts as well. And if you have a bigger budget, then you can actually get like a rep from either of these companies to make a campaign for you. And I think the minimum for that is about $3,000.
Okay. But just to get people, and I know that this is probably bid based, it depends on the targeting, but about what's like a $250 spend? Is that like a couple of spots on is it about 100 listens? Like I'm just
I
so
think
that people
that's like
sort of know.
8,000 listens or so.
Oh. That sounds really.
It's like a 30-second ad. Yeah, it's you get quite
really
a bit.
Affordable. Okay.
Yeah,
wow.
You get quite a bit. I mean, so everything is based on, it's all CPM advertising. So it's the CPM is cost per milli. So it's how much it costs for 1,000 impressions. I think they're around $30 CPM. So
okay,
if you're spending $300, you'd get 10,000 impressions.
Mm-hmm.
And these programs will also, if you write copy, part of the service is that they'll have someone record it. So you don't even need to record your own ad copy, because these are audio ads. These are audio ads that play during the shows. and they're usually linked with some kind of visual, like you can put a banner or something or some kind of image that will come up, for instance, on Spotify's platform when the ad is on, that makes it clickable. And then they also they do retargeting and all sorts of other things. So you can spend a little extra and get retargeting and all those things too. So it's the ad space in podcasting is getting more and more advanced. But with these two, you can't really target specific shows. With this third option, which is called Podcorn, this is like making a connection with a specific podcast. You write an entire brief and you say, like, here's my company, here's what I'm selling, here's, the cost. And then podcasters will actually apply to partner with you. And that's when you get that like host read endorsement advertisement. And this is just a platform to do that. You can also just like email a podcaster directly, right? If you want to be on their show, or if you want to advertise on their show. And there's a lot of really interesting opportunities in the space because, again, every podcaster, even if they're really small, might have a lot of value depending on what your niche is and what you're selling. Because the cool thing about podcasting is that it gets super, super, super niche. It gets super targeted, which is really cool.
Is Podcorn just for advertising, or is it also for like just connecting as far as being a guest?
Podcorn is not for connecting to be a guest.
Yeah,
so if you want to be a guest, I would first do a little bit of research. So what I would start with is just like a Google search, right? And try to find whatever show you are trying to find. So, if you don't know podcasting at all, like, if your niche is fishing, just literally Google fishing podcasts and start looking, and probably you're going to find the bigger shows. But then what you can do is all the apps at this point now have like people also listen to whatever. And then you can start finding maybe more niche and smaller shows through the like also listen to. And then you can start using something like Listen Notes, Listen Notes is like the IMDb of podcasts. If you're familiar with IMDb, I don't know if that's just like a nerd movie thing or if that's something.
What is IMDb?
That movie
Internet
database?
Movie Database. Yeah. So basically, so I can search on Listen Notes, and this is just listennotes.com. I could search for like so I click on search and it comes up with a bunch of stuff, but I can search for my podcast. And so this is my podcast. I can click on it. And it shows you like they have their own rankings and things. They have a listen score and a global rank. It's like approximately right. It gives you some idea of what a podcast's audience is. And it tells you about the show, and it gives you can actually listen to the show right in their platform, which is kind of cool. All the episodes are here. But the other really interesting thing is I can search for an actual person. So instead of searching for LOL with Kim Gravel, if I just search for Kim Gravel, and then I can see that she's been a guest on all these other podcasts. So this is just podcasts where she's. So like if again, if there's like an influential person in your space and you search for that person's name in Listen Notes and see the 10 podcasts that influential person has been on, hey, you want to be an influential person too, email those 10 podcasts, right? Listen to an episode and, make sure it's clear, obviously, that you know the show, that you really do add value, and that then you can potentially make a connection, listen to the show, or advertise in the show, etc. So that's really cool. This basically curates and automatically updates with like basically every podcast in the world, as far as I know. It's a really cool resource for podcast search. And I use it a lot. This is a tool I use a lot. So that's a good way to find it. And then literally just like searching on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or Spotify or wherever, and just seeing kind of what's out there and what's new. But again, most of what you're going to find initially are going to be really big shows. So again, if you want to advertise on a show with, 100,000 listeners, that single ad spot might be $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. And you may not have the budget to really make that worth it. Whereas, again, if you're just reaching a smaller audience, it could be really, really worthwhile. And there are different ways to advertise on podcasts too. There is just paying per listener, but there's also creating affiliate marketing deals where you'll have the ad on the podcast and they'll give like a special discount code or something, and then you pay that podcaster a percentage every time that discount code is used, something like that. Where you're only paying when there are sales, which is also a really great way to partner with smaller podcasts where, podcasts might only have 500 listeners, but if it's the 500 right listeners, it could be really valuable for you. But, on a CPM basis, like $15 or something is not going to be worth it necessarily for anyone to advertise and go through all that work. But if they get a lot of sales out of it, then it could be great, especially if you have a higher value product, right? You get 3 sales. That could be a lot for that right audience. Here, we can cancel the screen share for a second. I'll go back to, so I think, between sort of leveraging the like longer form story that you can sort of tell your story as a guest and also really create that connection, like that's really where the power of podcasters are. I also really love the idea of, what is like, who are the 5 people in your field or, in your industry who you would really love to meet? And, how many people do you really need, or what people do you need in order for your podcast to be really influential, right? If you sell if you're in like a really specific, like sub niche of like, I create widgets for robots that do this and, whatever, if the like 15 really influential people in the field all listen to your podcast because it's so specific and it's so dialed in, and you bring on and tell, really talk about, the cutting edge of whatever your industry is, those 20 listeners, if that's all your podcast is getting, if it's the 20 right people, it could be immensely powerful in your sub field. So, that's where sort of having like these really smaller podcasts as part of the strategy. And also, there are like private podcasts, right? Companies are leveraging podcasting within their organization. And this is for bigger companies to, talk to and tell sort of that internal story and communicate internally, which is really also interesting. So a lot of ways of podcasting is being used, and just audio is being leveraged in general to both advertise and market as well as, create that connection.
Well, and I will say, just from my very limited experience when I've had to get audio from people versus getting them to go on video.
Yeah.
If you ask 100 people, hey, will you record this soundbite for me? The fact that it's audio, and then the fact that maybe they can like try recording it a couple of times, feels fine. But something about video, I think I've gotten exactly 5 clients to go on video, including the Watertown SBDC being one of them in the last 14 years, because video scares a lot of people, but audio is nice because it's still, like you said, Zach, it has that sort of intimacy, but without that sort of like, I am on video
without being scary,
anxiety.
Yeah, totally. And it's a lot more, and video is way more expensive. Like making video look good, sound good, editing video, it takes more time, it takes more effort. Audio is really powerful. And it also is something that, again, if you go on a podcast and you have a great interview and you love it, ask that podcaster for, you can get embed links and just embed that podcast in your website, right? People will come to your website, they'll see in the About You page or something, they can click and listen. And that can be so powerful. They hear your voice, they get to know you a little bit better. And you can, again, create that connection and keep people on your website, which helps with Google SEO and all those other things that you want. You want people on your website. You want them to stay on your website for a longer period of time. And all of that sort of helps you. So it's really not just about, hey, I want to get into podcasting. It's also, how can I be smart about this? And how am I actually judging what a win is, right? And that's sort of where I want to sort of talk about at the, the things to consider when you're starting a podcast or considering getting into podcasting. How do you, what is the long-term goal, right? Because podcasting, again, especially if you're starting a podcast, it's going to take a while to grow that audience. It's like anything else. It's like you put a video up on YouTube and 8 people watch it. It's like, well, you have to keep putting content out for people to know to come back and watch. It's the same thing with podcasting. And so you really have to think about who is your audience and what do you want them to get out of it? What is the value you're bringing them? And, how does that position yourself, and your personal brand and your company? And then how do you measure success, right? And it shouldn't just be, I want as many people to listen as I can, right? Because again, that's now you're competing with like Joe Rogan and the people who've been doing it for 10 years and major media companies and A-list celebrities. And that's a losing battle. But if there's a way to measure success that is, more attainable, again, I want to be influential with, this subset. I want to talk to this specific community. I want to, sell more copies of my lecture series or my book or, whatever. And I want to speak to this really specific audience. That's where podcasting really, really shines. So figure out a way to quantify and measure success that isn't just more downloads, because you'll drive yourself crazy with that. And I have driven myself crazy with that. I've been there. So
Yeah, it almost sounds, Zach, like you almost want to avoid just thinking about podcasting in order to reach your direct consumer, right? It's almost like you have to think of the bigger picture and the influencers and other aspects that would make sense. Yeah.
Well, at that point, you're like I said, you're basically an influencer, and it's like anything else. There is, you are competing for, eyeballs or ears or whatever you want to call it, but
Right.
it is just about, unless you really are really into it and really just love doing it, you have to have some other sort of external thing that you can look at and be like, okay, we're getting something out of this. Our sales are going up, our notoriety is going up. We're getting written about, you can, again, create podcasts in order to then, show the press what you're doing, talk about all the cool innovations that you've got going on, open new locations, whatever you're doing, it can be really powerful, but there has to be some thought behind it and some strategy.
Yeah. And I imagine it's probably pretty important, or it could be helpful to look and see what other people are doing who might be in similar space that way.
Yeah.
And they've, reached people with their podcasts and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Who are they reaching? And, here's the thing, podcasters are typically, I've found that people usually aren't like, you're my competition, I'm not going to talk to you. Like they want, you want people on your show. You want to talk to people. You want to meet more people. That's why we do this. And so I think, podcasting and being a podcaster attracts a certain type of person who, again, might not even be the most outgoing person. Like I don't think of myself as the most outgoing person in the world, but part of the reason why I do like podcasting is because I'm able to do it and not like be on camera every week, like Nicole was saying. And I can make that sort of weekly content and have that longer conversation with listeners, through Kim and the show and through the other shows that I'm producing as well.
To your point about, collaborating with other podcasters and that kind of thing, I notice especially in kind of one space that I listen to podcasts, that they're all on each other's shows.
Yeah.
They're all being interviewed and so I think that's becoming pretty mainstream, and it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, and there are things you can do. I mean, shows are also doing like podcast swaps where I'll put an episode of my show onto your feed and you put an episode of your show onto my feed, and then like our listeners will each hear each other's shows. There's so many great collaborations that can come out of just, again, having that content and putting it in front of the right people, because you're creating that longer form connection.
It genuinely serves the listener too, right?
Yes. Yes. If you're really creating, if you can really show how you bring value to someone's listeners, like they're going to kill to have you on their show. Right. Yeah. And if you can really show it's not really about you, it's about creating value for the listeners. Right. And it's about creating that connection with the other podcaster you're partnering with, or with, what is the value that your brand is bringing, or what is the value of having that, live event if the podcaster has a show locally and, you have a venue or a restaurant or something, have the podcast record there live. Like there's so many really interesting things going on. And that's why I love this space so much, because people are just willing to innovate. It is really a place where, yes, there are now major media companies involved, but Up until 5 years ago, there weren't. Like, people were just doing it. It was independent, really a place for independent artists to make their art, to talk about what they want to talk about. And that can be problematic, but it's also really exciting for sure. Something I want to talk about before we run out of time is just talk about equipment for a second, because I know like that's sort of the next question that I get, which is like, what equipment do I need if I want to start a podcast? And I definitely am I sort of take the route of like, if it sounds good, it is good. I don't say like, oh, you have to buy some expensive mic or you need like, some great studio. You don't. You really don't. As long as you sound clear and it's not difficult to hear and understand what you're saying, I think that's half the battle. And that's harder to do than it seems. But what I would say is the first thing you want to do is buy a dynamic microphone. And a dynamic microphone is one that basically is made to be close to the what's creating the sound. So that's like the microphone that I'm using here. This is a Rode pod mic, and it's $100. So it's not super expensive. And it's a dynamic mic, which means it's not going to get as much room sound if you're not in a really like a professionally created studio. They can use different kinds of mics because the rooms are treated. We also use Kim on my show uses a Shure MV7, which is a $250 mic, which is really cool because it has a USB connection too, so you can connect right to your computer. So honestly, like I buy like a $16 mic on Amazon and send it to guests sometimes if they don't have any mic, and just let them keep it. And honestly, that sounds like 10 times better than, whatever they've already been using. So you don't need to spend a lot of money. Even your phone, like if you're just doing like voice record on your phone has a pretty sophisticated microphone that's very good at blocking out other sounds. So, like on your iPhone or whatever, or Android, if you want a place to start, like just start using that. Like really, I don't think it needs to be that complicated. I do think that you really need to think about where you're recording. So you need to be in a quiet space with lots of sound absorbing stuff in it. So in other words, like bedrooms tend to be a pretty good place to record podcasts, actually, because you have a bed with a whole lot of bedding on it. You have, a lot of times there's rugs, there's, window treatments that are usually, absorb sound because they're, anything that is like fluffy. If you think about sound waves as literally coming out of your mouth and bouncing off of hard surfaces, that's what creates echo, and that's what creates like mic problems. So the more just like fuzzy plush stuff that's in the room, couches and comforters and blankets and, comfy chairs and rugs and things, then the less sound is going to be reflected. And that is just really a great place to start. And then you can get super nerdy into this, and you can look up all sorts of videos and things about how to create a home studio. But you really don't need that much to start. You do need, and I'll share my screen for another minute.
Yeah, sure. And Zach, if you want, maybe we can just switch. I have a little tiny microphone.
Oh yeah.
And okay, so this is, I don't know, I got this for $50 on eBay. It's a little,
Yeah.
It's a mini Shure microphone. Okay, and what I'm going to do is so listen to me now, people listening. And what I'm going to do is switch the audio to my webcam. And you should hear a difference in the quality.
Yeah.
Now I'm on the webcam. Right?
It's way different. It's way different. Yeah.
Put it on the good microphone and you definitely hear it. And so what I would do is, because I've had people do this, they get really excited and then they'll go record they'll record like 10 episodes, just record a small clip and then listen to it with headphones on to make sure that it like sounds good, right? Okay, and do you want me to put this thing on the screen that you're sharing here?
Sure, yeah. So I have a few different resources that I just wanted to share, and for anyone that wants to just get into audio content creating,
you have the best resources
in general. This is the kind of stuff I like to share because it takes a while to just kind of find this stuff, but once you find it, it saves your butt. So this is a program called Descript, and this is not only can you use it for recording, it'll do screen recording. It records and edits video and audio. And it also does transcription. So the way this works basically is as it says, it's an all-in-one audio video editing as easy as a document. So the way it works is that it actually will transcribe your audio into just like a transcript, and then you can edit the transcript. You can copy and paste stuff, you can delete stuff, and it will actually cut the audio as you're doing that. So you don't actually need to know anything about like how to edit audio. You don't need to know anything about like, using, fancy audio editing programs or anything like that. You can literally just, hop on this, and, there's a learning curve. It's not like it's very user friendly though. And I think this costs here. I'll click on pricing. It's like, yeah, you can do 3 hours for free, and then it's like $12 a month if you're just in their first tier. And it does all sorts of really interesting stuff. It also will automatically cut out filler words. So it will find every time you say and you can cut those automatically. Just like I did just then. And those things are really powerful, and it's a really, really cool tool. I also really like this tool. It's called Aphonic, and it doesn't look all fancy with a whole lot of venture capital behind it the way that Descript is. But this is just like a really, really great workhorse tool that just makes your audio sound better. It will automatically basically automate all of the post-production stuff that you need to do. So to like master your audio, and it will do it with almost like one click. And it will also do, I think, 3 hours for free. You have a 2 hours totally free, the full program. You just drop your audio in. You don't have to download anything even. And it will just do it. It's really cool.
That's amazing.
It'll make your audio sound way better. So again, if you have a little bit of reverb or something, if you have, just drop it in here, try it, export it, download it, and listen. Whatever sounds better, that's your show. Then you need a hosting platform. So that is the way that podcasting works is once you record your audio, you need to basically put it online somehow, and you need to get it to Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Google and Amazon, all those things. So you need a hosting platform, and a platform that I like that's pretty user-friendly is called Buzzsprout. There are many, many other platforms. Some of them are free. Anchor is one that is the most widely used. It's actually owned by Spotify, and they make it's totally free to use. I like Buzzsprout a lot because they give you a lot of really great tools, and the pricing is pretty good. But you basically upload your audio here. You need to create a little graphic, like a show graphic like you see here. So I like to use Canva for that. I'm sure a lot of folks who own businesses and do stuff know Canva already. And then you upload it, and it's pretty much that simple. And then it will, every time you put a new episode in, it'll just automatically get distributed to all the platforms that you've told it to distribute to. So for instance, like when I put out a new episode of my podcast, I don't actually use Buzzsprout. I use a different service that's a little more robust at a higher professional level, called Megaphone. But I put it up, I upload everything, and I tell it when I want it to premiere, and it goes everywhere all at once, including my podcast website.
Yeah. And just throwing this out there, because I know if you run WordPress, there's a WordPress plugin called Blueberry.
Yes.
They take out some of the vowels, but if you type in Blueberry podcast plugin WordPress,
it's BLU.
Yeah, BRRY. Yeah. So yeah. So that's free. There's a paid version that gives you better stats essentially on your listening. It's like $5 a month or something for the better stats.
And I know the guy that I follow, the guy that owns this on Facebook, and he's really active, and he's,
Yeah. So basically what it does is
well-respected.
it adds a special area of your WordPress post where you upload the MP3 file, and then it automatically distributes it. And it's relatively straightforward, just like So if you already have a website, you could check out, you know, I don't know, maybe Squarespace has a way that it deals with podcasts or something like that. So if you already have a website, you could put the files on there. But if you want your podcast to be like a separate thing and to, you know, just do podcasting really well, what is it? What was it called? Buzzsprout?
Oh, Buzzsprout. Yes.
Yeah.
Buzzsprout.
So
And
yeah.
Buzzsprout has a lot of tools. Like they'll do a basic website for you. They'll do some like audiograms and some marketing stuff for you. They also have a really cool tool where you can add audio to the beginning or end, and you can do that to all your episodes at once, like after the fact. So in other words, let's say you have 100 episodes of your podcast and you are releasing your book next week. You could make a little ad that just automatically gets dumped in the front of every podcast, that every time someone downloads it from then on out, they'll hear you say like, hey, my book comes out on May whatever, and you should buy it. And now here's the show. And one click, it's on every single podcast in your library. So again, because
it's almost worth it. That's almost worth it. What's the approximate pricing on that? Is it like 15-ish bucks a month or something?
I mean, you know, not even
12
bucks.
There you go. Yeah. So I mean,
so if you have an hour show that you're doing once a week, you're like $18 a month.
Right. So if you look at the stuff, guys, right? Like if you're buying a $16 or even $100 microphone and then you're paying $12 a month for hosting, it's not like this would necessarily be an expensive experiment to run. It's just more on your time, right?
It's time. Yeah, it's definitely time. And I got news for you. So they also have Magic Mastering, which like they're saying they'll master it for you. That is Aphonic. It's the same. They've literally licensed this program to use on their website. So for what that's worth.
I'm glad Aphonic's getting its money from somewhere, you know?
Yeah. Huh. I wonder why that's not loading. Okay. Well, I also use a website. So if I go to my podcast website, lolkim.com, I'll give myself a plug. My internet is not, I don't know why my internet's not really chugging, but I use a website called service called Podpage, which creates a website for podcasts. It's basically like a Squarespace or any of those other ones, but it is specific to podcasters. So when I release a new episode, everything automatically gets uploaded onto the website automatically, sort of like the Blueberry plugin for WordPress, but it creates a whole website around that. And I can create blog posts and other content around that as well. And that's worked really well for me. And then I just wanted to mention there's some really interesting, if you want to get really into, if you're like an advertiser and want to get really into stuff, the US podcasting advertising revenue study just came out like in the last, like this month, May 2022, from IAB, who's the sort of main entity behind podcast advertising. I literally just found this before, like minutes before I started this. So it was just up on my computer. And this is the Infinite Dial research study where those graphs came from, which is Edison Research. And you can download that for free as well. You just need to give them your email address. Oh, maybe not even. There it is.
Oh, no, they made me give my email, my phone number.
Yeah, they make you do all that. But,
but you know,
it's worth it. I mean, there's a lot of really interesting stuff here, and not just about podcasting, about everything from technology to, like, if you're interested in how many internet connected watch people there are, it's 57 million. But yeah, there's a lot of really interesting stuff out there.
And I was going to ask you this question earlier, Zach, but then I'm wondering if they also kind of measure, you know, what kind of actual formatting as far as how you're doing your podcasting. Is, you know, is Q&A tend to be more popular, you know, or more listened to, or is it, because, you know, it sounds to me like the LOL podcast you do, you're not interviewing subject matter experts, right? It's just the two of you on together.
Oh, yeah. So for that show, and we can stop the screen share. I think for that show, we really focus on, really the podcast is like about, Kim has a fashion brand and she's all about like just basically like lifting women up, right? So we talk about just like all the crap that kind of like people have to face, and from everything from like being a parent to just like, you know, going through, Kim's 50 and she's going through menopause and she talks about that a lot. And like, it's just like, we kind of have fun with like real topics. And we like to bring on people from like comedians to, authors and business
so you
experts and
do.
things like that.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
we do a little bit of that.
Yeah.
But we do have a format, and I have like, I break down every episode. We do like a cold open. So like we describe what the show is right in the beginning. And really like what the episode is, and to some extent like the value proposition, right? What are you going to get out of listening to this? And again, we're less like, we're a podcast about marketing and you're going to learn about this really specific thing. Like, that's not the show we're making, but that's really powerful. And that, making sure you are upfront with why listen to this episode, what's the value, is really important. And then what I think is, if you have a guest, introduce the guest, research the guest, make sure you really know who the guest is. And then it's really just about your style, right? I mean, there are some podcasts that I love that put, edit in such a way that the actual podcaster is barely in it. There's a podcast I love called Song Exploder, where basically they interview musicians about how they created their like hit songs, but the host is like barely in it, if in it at all. It really just is like, it almost sounds like a monologue that the musician is saying, but it's clear, at least to me, that like he's been interviewed, like they're asking questions, they're pulling all that stuff out, and they're just editing it in that way. But really, I think the thing that to think about is, how are we going to build the connection? What is the value, first of all? How am I building that connection with the audience, right? I constantly have to remind myself and remind Kim to talk like to the audience directly, right? Like, hey, you out there, right? We've started listening and answering audience questions. We'll do fun things like, if we get a really great review, we might read the review on the show, which, like, reading a review on the show is a great way to get more people to rate reviews, right? Rather than just saying, hey, write us a review, right? And there's a lot of just fun that you can have with it, and it really should suit your personality. If you're someone that wants to be the center of attention, then make yourself the center of the show. If you're less comfortable with that, make your guest the center of the show, and make sure you're putting a really great scaffolding around them to be smart about how you're introducing them and smart about how you're positioning yourself. Just think of, what are the smart questions I can ask? And really, the trick to interviewing well is not spending a ton of time and having that list of questions and sticking to it. It's listening to what the guest says and then asking that follow-up question in a conversational way that's leading them to where you ultimately want to get, right? I hate it when I hear, and this is something my students do a lot when we do documentary work in my video production classes. They have like the 10 questions they want to ask. They ask their 10 questions, even if like question, 3 had an amazing answer that like there could be 5 different follow-ups to that. They'll still just like go to the next question on their list and take it in a totally different direction and lose all of that momentum, right? And that doesn't feel very conversational. It's, it makes you kind of get whiplash, and you're like, wait, I thought we were talking about this and now we're talking about this other thing. So really listen to what your guests are saying and try to respond to that, then stick to like your plan. Way better results from that.
Yeah, because people are going to bring up stuff you're not expecting.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was interviewing someone, and then he talked about how he like ate a falcon got electrocuted on a wire.
Yeah.
And they ended up giving him the falcon, and he ate it just to see what it would taste like. I was not expecting a falcon eater.
I have 100 questions about that now. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
There's follow-up questions to that.
Yeah. No, it was, but it's one of those things where like, if you let people talk, they'll say some really interesting stuff. And, maybe your interview was 2.5 hours, but like part of your job as the stand-in for the audience is to cut that down to the best parts, and to make it like 30 minutes or whatever. So yeah, we have to do the work for our audiences.
And I wouldn't stress length that much.
I wouldn't stress length, but just like sometimes no one wants to listen to a 2.5 hour. Well, I mean, maybe some people do, but a lot of people will appreciate you.
Joe
going
Rogan has
through
made an
and-
entire career of it, but most people aren't Joe Rogan.
Right. And for example, before this live stream, like, we talked to Zac and he came, we did some planning so that even though this was an, hour long sort of off the cuff conversation, it was structured. So, yeah, just do your audience a favor, but yeah. Anything else, Zac, before we would close out the broadcast today?
I think we're good. I mean,
Awesome.
I really had fun doing this though. This
is great. Thank you so much. We have a real professional here. So
Seriously.
Zac Miller will they'll put the name of his company on the screen here in case you want to get a hold of him to produce your podcast or help you with just audio visual storytelling in general. And kind of stay tuned next week where audio conversations will continue about how to use them in marketing. Zac, thanks so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate Nicole. I appreciate Erica. Yeah.
That's fantastic information. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure many did or will in the future too. It was really great. So
the resources are out there. And actually Buzzsprout has a phenomenal blog and YouTube channel too, and they have a lot of stuff on there. So if you are interested in just taking one more step and dipping your toe in, check their content out for sure.
Okay,
awesome.
Great.
And thank you, Nicole, as always.
Right. No, thanks you guys. All right. Have a great week, everybody. See you next week. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.